Let's start by giving the floor to the co-author of the excellent book, The War of Return, which makes the powerful case of how UNRWA, the UN agency that is supposed to help Palestinians, actually perpetuates the conflict. Dr. Einat Wilf.
Congratulations, UN Watch, on your amazing database. I noticed in going through your database that you addressed the question of tone. That is, not just the insane number of resolutions that are pressed against Israel, but you looked at the question of tone, which is something that always struck me when I first learned about it, that not only is there an insane amount of resolutions against Israel in UN bodies, but that the tone of these resolutions, unlike resolutions against other countries, is always dark and bleak and with nothing redeeming to say about Israeli efforts. So I wanted to know how you, in your methodology, address the question of tone. How are you able to discern the tone of the anti-Israel resolutions compared with other resolutions? What are the elements that made you track certain resolutions as having a darker tone, a bleaker tone than others? I'd be very interested in that.
Thank you. Those are very important points. Let me say a word about the tone of resolutions and more generally about the importance of our methodology in terms of which resolutions really matter. Indeed, UN resolutions on Israel stand out, not only in terms of the extreme numbers, but also in the particular language used. On our database homepage, towards the bottom, you can see a section comparing the tone of resolutions. When it comes to resolutions on other countries, even on dictatorships like North Korea, Belarus, or Eritrea, often the UN will include diplomatic language of praise, encouragement, or acknowledgement of positive steps. By contrast, when it comes to Israel, the texts are typically full of strong condemnations with never a single word of praise or any recognition whatsoever of something positive. Our analysis looks at what kind of language is used, along with multiple other factors, to determine whether a resolution counts as the condemnation of a country or not. You may ask why it matters. Well, it matters quite a bit. When journalists ask the UN for statistics about how many country resolutions were adopted by the Human Rights Council, they misleadingly inflate the numbers in order to make the Council seem fair, balanced, and universal, and in order to downplay the bias against Israel. In 2017, a UN spokesperson said the Human Rights Council had adopted 149 resolutions in the previous year. He was counting resolutions that don't deal with countries, or those that are part of a mandatory review that all countries undertake, but which have nothing to do with condemnations. In fact, many of those texts adopt reports that are full of praise for dictatorships. The UN Watch database, however, counts the resolutions that matter, the condemnations, the ones designed to name and shame. Instead of the UN's inflated figure of 149, our methodology shows clearly that there were only 17 resolutions adopted that year which actually condemned countries. Our examination of each resolution looks at whether the text criticizes or praises the government, whether it creates a mechanism to investigate the country concerned, and whether it was adopted under an agenda item dealing with violations, or rather with mere technical assistance. The UN statistics do none of these things. Their inflated count includes a 2009 resolution that praised Sri Lanka for, quote, promotion and protection of all human rights, right after they had slaughtered 40,000 Tamils. They also count a 2010 resolution that likewise praised Sudan, despite atrocities in Darfur for its, quote, promotion and protection of human rights. The UN equates these resolutions that praise countries with resolutions that don't. The outcome allows them to minimize the discrimination against Israel. Under one version of their count, the Human Rights Council condemned Israel in 9% of its resolutions last year. Our database demonstrates that, in fact, the number is 26%, nearly 3 times as much. Likewise, when the HRC in September adopted 2 conflicting resolutions on Venezuela, the UN counts them as the same. But our analysis points out what matters, that one text was designed to truly hold the Maduro regime to account, while the other was sponsored by Iran, praised the Maduro regime and was supported by Venezuela itself. The same goes for conflicting resolutions that have been adopted on Yemen and Burundi. If the country that is being addressed supports the text, that's usually a good sign that the resolution is not a condemnation. Our careful analysis pierces through the veil to explain what's really going on in each resolution and how we assess each text.